So I talked briefly about uh, second generation Dragon Slayers, and I wanted to cover third because third to me has always been the most interesting in terms of like in terms of addition to the series. When you think about each type, one and two, I think one and two make so much sense just from the standpoint of like, okay, there's the standard original way you do it. There's like a way of artificially doing it from parts of a dragon, and relatively modern technology for their verse of being able to grind it into, just refine it, parts of them, seemingly just a heart specifically, into a crystal and implanting that into your bodies. It makes sense with just the advancement of Lacrima and different ways that they utilized magic sourcing and whatnot. So Gen 2 always made sense to me. And Gen 4 is relatively just Gen 2, but put through inanimate objects. I mean, I have to do still a video on Gen 4. There was a comment that mentioned that Athena should be Gen 4, which made a lot of sense. She's essentially like one of the Quantum Knights, just intelligent and sentient. And then 5th Gen is interesting just because it's 5th Gen is like probably what could have been either 1st or 2nd gen, but it couldn't have been 1st gen unless you literally just kind of looted after two dragons fighted and ate part of a dragon. But it makes sense that once given the ability to forge this new way, that they, someone like Georg was able to be like, okay, well, what if I just eat this dude? Makes sense. But 3rd generation dragon slaying, I've always thought that 3rd generation should be like its own outside variant, kind of like how you have the hybrid modes, the dual types, because it is just 1 and 2 combined. You're already a 1st generation Dragon Slayer, or in the case maybe if you were 2nd generation Dragon Slayer and you learned 1st gen, but you are just combining 1 and 2. And at least from what we've seen, 3rd generation Dragon Slayers tend to be the weakest. It just seems to be that, like, one of the things I talked about with 2nd gen is 2nd gen, the big problem is you wouldn't have anything to reference. So while learning how to use the Dragon Slayer magic, you are essentially doing it, on the fly. You don't have like a dragon to be like, oh, I've seen, if I'm using X element, in like Laxus's case, Dragon Lightning, he's never seen a lightning dragon, so he wouldn't have the steps to kind of be like, okay, well, if I I saw him do this thing, what if I adapt this into an attack? Or what if I said, okay, I saw this, how do I figure out how to do this and implement it into how I fight? You don't have that kind of way of progressing through example. And it'd be kind of like if you, again, it'd be like if somebody showed you how to use like a computer and you'd never done anything with computers before, versus like you were just given a computer and you were like, okay, well, I have to wing it and try and figure out what to do. But with 3rd gen, you are like, it makes sense from the idea that you, like, if you're already a 1st gen, like, well, what if I got this thing that they invented, this 2nd generation Dragon Slayer idea, and combined it with what I have now? And it seems to me that 3rd generation is a fast boost, but it's like a complacency issue. At least from what we've been demonstrated, again, whenever somebody, and it's mostly just Sting and Rogue, I wish I'd get a couple more, but there's already the innate baseline, 1st gen, you learned it from a dragon, you have examples of like what to go off of, you have more kind of set instincts, because logically too, they would have been 1st generation Dragon Slayers for years before becoming 3rd generation, because either they would have somehow both found Lacrima that are respectively to their attribute, which I find very unlikely, or they just had the money to obtain them, which makes far more sense given Sabretooth was where it was at. And it would make complete sense to me if Genma would, be willing to use money while they're atop to boost his 2 Dragon Slayers. So with that, it's like, when you think about it, like I said, a complacency issue, if you are already, because think about it like this, if you are one of the, Sting and Rogue, for example, and you are already relatively at the top, you get a boost that just makes you stronger baseline without having to do anything. There's probably not a lot of drive to get stronger. And on top of that, it's like if you get I don't know why I'm quoting it. You get Dragon Force through the Lacrima. We've seen through 2nd gen that 2nd generation Dragon Force, it's a boost, but it's not even remotely close to the process of which you get Dragon Force, either from eating the attribute or energy source that you are able to intake that breaks your limits and puts you into this level of strength, or naturally achieving Dragon Force through, you know, just getting strong enough, getting the level of technique and experience enough, or just getting like a rage power up. There's like Laxus didn't have a ton of examples, but we know Cobra regularly puts on the dragon scales and the arms, so it's consistent enough that it's not just, you know, it's not just a one write off where it's like they did it once. No, second generation and third generation Dragon Force seems to just be far more easily obtained, and I think with something like that on top of for first gen, you would feel probably a lot more accomplished. Like, oh, I've done it, I did it. You get, you know, you get a drive form, you get this free drive form, and then you get Dragon Force probably relatively easily. I would assume it would be like, it'd be like if you, like, you opened up a YouTube channel, or like, you know, you streamed, and very early you hit some, you know, random stride and spike, and you didn't want to, you didn't take advantage of that. You just kind of like sat like, well, I guess I'm going to be good forever, and then like 2 months later you lose all that opportunity, and then you just kind of go back to where you were. It'd be like, well, you had the chance and you had the resources, but because of just, like, you know, complacency, you got to where the laziness is ultimately what defeated you. And I think that that was one of the reasons as well with Sting and Rogue, is it didn't seem like the Dragon Slayers, you know, in their case especially, were ever really pushed and went on adventures or anything that made them constantly have to keep going, keep getting stronger. It seemed like stagnation was a really big issue with that general area of what was going on for a couple of years. And we know stuff like Kagura and Jura never really competed in the Grand Magic Games. Leon was generally just kind of carrying his whole team. Ichia is near impossible to get serious in time for most fights. And when you really compare it to the other dragon slaying generations, I just don't really see what third generation has to offer in comparison. Because again, first generation is it's the OG. It seemingly everything in first gen, like, it's harder to obtain, but obtaining it has better results. Second generation, it seems more so that, like, with dragon slaying, you use it kind of as like a, like, you can either use it as your primary or secondary, and then have other, you know, because they obtained Ilakrima later on, they have other magics besides dragon slaying magic on top of it, so there's a little bit of multi-classing in there. I guess multi-specking more so. Fourth generation, I would assume that because it's inanimate objects and, you know, machinery, is like there's no motion sickness involved. There's probably a little bit easier mechanics of how they can kind of go around, like energy usage and replenishment, as well as, like, if you are able to build it artificially, you could probably pick and choose the parts. And then it's like if you built something like a Stellanium knight and then gave it dragon slaying magic, it would evolve and kind of become like Animus, I would assume. Like, it would dragonize the Stellanium and turn it into a weird hybrid kind of living machine. And then with fifth gen has stuff like they don't have motion sickness, and their dragon force is a lot faster, but it is a drawback of loss of control. So third gen, I mean, the drive form to me is the best part about third gen. I think the drive form, because it's almost like getting a free trial of Dragon Force. I think if you were a third gen, you got to that, and even if you were able to achieve Dragon Force earlier, I would probably way more so use drive form until you can actually get Dragon Force to be at the level that it should be, or at least figure out a way to kind of like optimize the fact that it is a boost. But again, if you compare like what Laxus and Cobra got when they used their dragon powers and got scales and stuff, they got a boost not nearly as close to even Tower of Heaven Natsu. Sting and Rogue got a boost when they were going about using their Dragon Force, but again, it's not to the level that we saw with Dragon Force Natsu from Tower of Heaven. And you have to keep that in mind, is Dragon Force works by playing off of the base of the character. So even if your Dragon Force percentage and multiplier and stuff never, it doesn't grow, if you get stronger, it's going to give a higher result because your base is stronger. And Natsu at the time of the Tower of Heaven was, above foot soldier. He wasn't S-class candidate level, but he was still well above your average person. And he went to where he was able to blitz and steamroll a Wizard Saint. Now, when you look at Sting and Rogue were already S-class candidate level. But it's very clear that even when using Dragon Force, they aren't, Like they were maybe low Wizard Saint level, but they weren't like I would be pretty confident that you put Sting and you go back to Grand Magic Games, you put Sting or Rogue Dragon Force against Urza. Urza was should just mop the floor with him. So when you look at stuff like that, it makes me wonder again of what of the general value of being a third generation Dragon Slayer. And it's why I think it's probably the worst out of the five, because it seems like the easy boost of getting the Lacrima, I would say like you could probably do that with generations 4 and 5 and give relatively the same results, or if not better results. But it seems that third gen, just because of the Lacrima edition on top of being it'd be like I used like a YouTuber thing earlier. It's like it'd be like the difference. It's like if you if you became you got a popularity spike while already being like rich, like you come from a rich and successful family, you get that spike and then you somehow mess it up, or you're only able to sustain this because you were already riding the coattails of somebody else in this position. It to me, because it's like if you think about it, third generation as well, I mean you could only really achieve it with money, and on top of that, it doesn't give the same level of perks and values that you would get of just naturally achieving Dragon Force. That's why I think the drive forms are the only thing really that comes out of third gen that makes me go, okay, this is cool. But other than that, because it's like if you got say like an early access to what some of the buffs and stuff you would get once you achieve Dragon Force, I'd say okay. But like again, that's another thing. Looking at Dragon Force Sting and White Drive Sting, there wasn't any real like, oh, now I can do this. I have this additional skill I can do. Like maybe beforehand I can only use the White Dragon Claw to singular direct combat, but maybe now as with Dragon Force I can AoE it or something. And then he didn't gain anything like that, so I would assume it is just a direct power boost. But because also it's easier to obtain, I think it blindsides and it ultimately cripples a lot of these people. Because on top of that, if you were in the verse and you didn't understand the mechanical differences and aspects of how these powers and stuff all operated, and you were a third generation Dragon Slayer, you just became a third generation Dragon Slayer, you achieved Dragon Force, you'll probably be relatively confused because like, if you know anything like researching Dragon Slayer, you'd be like, oh, Dragon Force is their final form, it's their ultimate power. So if I peaked, have I reached the top? How would you know if you really did it if you don't have respective results? Because it's again, if you compare where Natsu was when Natsu, and also with the whole Flame of Rebuke Natsu as well, there's just, I mean, you can even compare just Lightning Flame Dragon mode Natsu from Sirius Island. There's just such a dramatic climb of levels when you either achieve it through artificial induction or you achieve it, well, in those cases it's all artificial induction, but it's always done in a way that is more so beneficial for the user and gives higher end results rather than getting these cheating fast passes. Because you can cheat through eating an energy source or getting a boost from somebody nearby, but just getting the Lacrima implanted in you, it doesn't seem to be that good of a choice. And we know on top of that from Laxus is that the Lacrima seems to be somewhat of a crutch. It seems to be something that does hinder you a little bit, but I think it's not a direct power thing. I think it is a mental block, and it is something that is going, like, ultimately makes it so you aren't able to get in the full status. But I think the best way to describe it is that the Lacrima from second and third gen, they're like training wheels. They give you an extra like handhold way to progress and get stronger, but if you stay on it too long, like you're only setting yourself up to get humiliated and setting yourself up to get rocked. Because if you don't take that jump and take advantage of it and don't figure out like how can I optimize the fact that I got this borderline of free power boost of not just stats but also like gaining some new skills, I would assume that it's just like you're a character that is again asking for somebody that puts in the work and has more knowledge and experience. You just show up and then put you in the dirt. So I'd love to hear what other people have to say about this. I've always thought that third generation it's weird. Again, it's weird that it's its own thing. It's weird that it is Generation 3 and not some form of like, we're the Generation X or something. It's like some kind of like side thing. Because to me, again, ones that are like 1, 2, 4, and 5 make sense as its own thing. 3 just feels like a hybrid form, but in a different direction, and it should have been its own. It should have been in its like subcategory, but it is its own thing. Obviously, it's been over a decade since that it was introduced. But at the end of the day, I mean, some of them are going to be better than others. Some of them are going to have their, their own ups and downs of what makes them useful. I think the Lacrima, it's better as a second gen, but as a third gen, it just seems like, like I said, you're leaning on training wheels too long, and you're just going to end up looking silly at some point when somebody who is at that level or have achieved higher peaks through effort and battles and whatnot, like with Natsu and Sting and Rogue, you can tell that Sting and Rogue had not been in a situation like that before, where it's like they're teamed up, they're a 2v1ing somebody, and they're just getting bodied. Like Natsu was just slapping them around and really putting in the effort, and like Lecter and Frosh didn't know really what to do. And so it was just, I think it's more of a direct telling of what kind of character you're going to be dealing with. If you have a character that has a Dragon Lacrima, either second or third gen, and their personality and powers reflect. If they're second gen and they're like, oh, I have other abilities besides Dragon Slaying magic that I've made sure to keep up skill on, that's going to be a character you're probably going to have more value towards. If you're a third generation and this character is just like, oh yeah, well guess what I achieved after only being a Dragon Slayer for 6 months because I got a Lacrima 4 months in, bam, Dragon Force, and it's like sweet at times 2 power up. And then like, Natsu or someone comes in, it's like, it's supposed to be like hundreds of times stronger, and it's like, what the fuck? But anyway, other than that, comment below, tell me your thoughts about this and whether or not you agree with me or you disagree with me. If you've agreed that third gen is usually, I mean, again, I don't think third gen is bad, because like you still have to be a first gen at some point to be a third gen, and the OG first gen is always the one that comes out on top. So I don't know. Yeah, third gen is like the millennial version of Dragon Slayers. They're like, they're just trying to get a little bit more modern, and then they ended up getting rocked by the traditional Dragon Slayers. Anyway, other than that, I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.